Hello everyone, this is Mathfinder, the home for every math nerd's Pathfinder optimization needs. If you're new here, welcome, and we're so glad to have you. If you've been here before, welcome back, and thank you so much for your continued support. Today's video is about two new spellcasting archetypes presented in Impossible Magic. Impossible Magic being Paizo's newest book coming out at the end of this month, and I have been making many preview videos on this book because there's just so much to digest. My previous video was about the whole bunch of new spells that spellcasters received, which are going to change the meta, so to speak, of how casters are built. And today's video is about two specific archetypes, both of which are designed to pertain to spellcasters specifically, and in my opinion, one of them is like problematically mathematically broken, and the other is very strong, bordering on broken. So let's get right into it and talk about both of those and why I think they're broken. The first archetype I wanted to talk about is Spellshifter. The thematics of this archetype are that you are a character that has studied magic so deeply that you can mutate spells, and you can do so in a way that goes beyond just spell shaping them. So this is not the same as spell shape. You gain a bespoke action called shift spell, and one, it gets effects that are noticeably stronger than spell shapes in a lot of cases, or at least noticeably more complex. And two, they're not actually considered spell shapes themselves, so they can stack with spell shapes if you have access to them. So this is what the dedication feat for that looks like. You are required to be trained in Arcana to pick it. You get something called a conduit, which must be held in your hand as you are using your spell shifts, and you gain the shift spell action. The way that works is you spend one action with the concentrate or manipulate traits while you are within the affected area of an ongoing spell, or you can physically touch an object or a creature under the effects of that spell. And of course, you're holding your conduit. Those are some stringent requirements, and in theory, they should be enough to rein in any problematic interactions that this could cause. We will get into why they don't rein it in later on, but for now, just let's look at the dedication feat. The effect is that you choose one of your spell shift actions, and then you attempt an Arcana check against the caster's spell DC or the DC of the spell, depending on whichever is there. There is a clause about how the caster knows what you're trying to do with your spell shift, and a willing caster can allow you to auto-upgrade the effect of your spell shift attempt. And this is because if you go through the rest of the archetype, you do get spell shift effects that are useful against enemies and some that are useful against allies, etc. So you have reasons to be targeting both. That's why there is the clause that if you do this with an enemy, they know what you're attempting to do, and if you use this on a friend, they're allowed to let you take over. Then, regardless of what you did on your check, that spell becomes immune to shift spell for 24 hours. Not the spell caster, that spell. That is to say, that casting of that spell. If you spell shifted somebody's, say, freezing rain, and then later on they use another freezing rain, that's a different spell. Remember that, because this is not going to be a functional limitation to you being able to use spell shift in the broken ways. Now, the default spell shift you get is shift burden. You share the burden of casting a spell. If sustaining the spell causes the creature to attempt a saving throw, it is attempted against your Arcana DC, rather than the spell's normal DC. There's also a clause for attack rolls, and then the effects are as follows. On a failure or critical failure, nothing happens. On a success, you get to sustain the spell as a free action right away for the cost of the action you spent on shift spell. And on a critical success, if the spell is sustainable, you can sustain the spell as a free action immediately, and then for the remainder of the duration, you sustain the spell if you want with your actions. The original caster still can, to be clear, it's just that you can also sustain the spell. Now, the broken part here is the Arcana DC, because skills typically scale higher and faster in a purely numerical sense compared to spell DCs. Is there a way to then break the use of your Arcana DC? And you would guess no, because the requirements are so stringent, right? You have to be within the area of an ongoing spell, or you have to be able to touch an object or a creature affected by it, which is pretty hefty. Like, you don't want to be inside a big area damage spell and then sustain it with this. But there is a follow-up feat that breaks it. And before I show it to you, I do just want to re-emphasize this archetype is overall very fun and cool. There are various other spell shift options you can pick up, some that have to do with counteracting or redirecting spells. There's just a lot going on, and honestly, it's a really fun and flavorful archetype. But what breaks it is the level 6 reactive spell shift feat. It is triggered by a creature within 30 feet casting a spell, and the only requirement on it is that you are holding your conduit. If you then use this reaction, you are allowed to attempt to shift the triggering spell, even if you do not meet the other requirements that you normally need to shift spell. So you don't need to be within the area of the spell. You don't need to be able to physically touch an object or creature affected by the spell. The only requirement is that you have to be holding your conduit. Now, there is an added clause that a caster that you use this reaction on is allowed to take back the casting of the spell. They will still waste the 2 actions and the daily activations and slots that they spent on this. So basically, it would disrupt the spell if they elect to not let you spell shift it. And that is relevant with some of the other spell shifts you can get. Like, if you retarget somebody's spell with a spell shift, the caster might do a take backseat on it and basically just waste 2 actions. But that is not the broken part. The broken part is that now you can make spells use your Arcana DC without also being within the area affected by them, and that is crazy busted. So first, just to get a good measure of how broken this effect might be, let's look at Arcana DC scaling and compare it to Spellsave DC. I took both of these numbers from a wizard. You have maxed out intelligence, so +4 at level 1, +5 at level 10, apex at level 17, and +7 at level 20. You're starting with trained in Arcana and increasing it to expert, master, and legendary as quickly as possible, so level 3, 7, and 15. Note that your spell save DC is going to improve to expert at level 7, master at level 15, and legendary at level 19. And then I assumed automatic bonus progression on that Arcana skill. So +1 item bonus at level 3, +2 item bonus at level 9, and +3 item bonus by level 17. Automatic bonus progression is not an unreasonable assumption for Arcana, by the way, because there's plenty of Arcana boosting items. There are many available at level 3, and then by level 9 or 10, you can use something like the Ring of Wizardry or the Accolade Robe to get the +2, and at level 17, you have the Greater Accolade Robes, and like the Greater Accolade Robe is a fantastic item for any spellcaster that's int-based, so there's no real question to it. You're going to have that +3 to Arcana. The red line is what the Arcana DC looks like, so 10 plus your Arcana modifier, and the blue line is what your spell save DC looks like. As you can see, at levels 1 to 2, they're identical, and at level 3, you will see that Arcana pulls +3 ahead of your spell save DC, and never falls below that. It is bigger than that at some levels, all the way up to +5 at levels 17 and 18, but it never falls back down below a +3. That is simply the mathematical truth of what happens if you're allowed to use Arcana DC for your spell saves. And this math progression is why I suspect that Spellshifter is going to be broken on intelligence-based casters. Starting at level 3, you are always 3 points ahead of a natural spell save DC. And specifically at level 17 and 18, we're talking about a 5-point difference. It does go back down to a 3-point difference at level 19 and 20, but there is a point where there's a 5-point difference, and there are other points where there's a 4-point difference. Now remember, when it comes to most spells, every individual +1 is a 10% swing. I know there's an intuition that a +1 is typically a 5% swing on a d20, but because of Pathfinder's 4 degrees of success system, there are going to be points where, say, if you're fighting a minion, they fail on a 13, which means they crit fail on a 3. A +1 to your DC now turns 4 from a fail into a crit fail, and 14 from a success into a failure. The reverse will be true for bosses. If they succeed on a 7, they're critically succeeding on a 17. +1 to your DC turns 17 from a crit success to a regular success, and 7 from a success into a failure. So long as your spell has 4 distinct effects as its degrees of success, so usually it'll be like critical success, unaffected, success, half effect, failure, full effect, critical failure, double effect. So long as you have such 4 different actual effects on your spell saving throw, a +1 is a 10% swing, which means we are talking at a minimum a 30% swing on the math of the d20. And at a maximum in that level 17 to 18 range, we are talking half of all the outcomes on the d20 being affected. That is a crazy math boost. Just if you don't believe me, just think about how the fighter's defining ability to interact with the game is simply a +2 bonus to their attack rolls. And that is enough to make them the most fundamentally good martial, the one that can use any combination of weapons, any combination of maneuvers as they like, and the others then need damage boosters, etc. to be as good as the fighter. The fighter doesn't get a passive damage booster for their attacks simply because of how accurate they are. That is how powerful a +2 to attack rolls is. A +2 to spells would be more powerful than a +2 to attack rolls, and it's bigger than a +2. It's a +3 at a minimum, and sometimes a +5. This is a math-breaking archetype, and nothing is stopping you from using reactive spellshift on your own spells. So you don't have to infringe on anyone else's build. You don't have to coordinate with anyone. You can simply use it on your own spells. You just cast any spell, up to 3 actions. You don't even need an action available for this, and then just use your reaction to then boost your own DC by 3 to 5 points. I will also note here that if you succeed, you do get a free action sustain as part of that reaction, which at first glance might be like, oh, you can use a sustained damage spell and double dip. But funnily enough, most sustained damage spells have wording preventing you from using a sustain on your own turn. Like, it says on subsequent rounds when you sustain. So that is the wording difference. There are a lot of spells that say when you cast the spell, and then when you sustain, and both of those refer to an effect happening, but the when you sustain often has an on subsequent rounds qualifier. For example, take a look at Phantasmal Orchestra. When you sustain the spell, on subsequent rounds, it does damage. That being said, there are spells that don't have such a rider. For example, Floating Flame does have a once per round limitation to the damage you do, but you're allowed to use the reaction to move the Floating Flame an extra time. So you can use it to catch, say, 3 enemies instead of 1 that you were previously going to catch as part of your reaction that you use when the spell was cast. So what broken stuff can we do with this? What is it about this +3 to +5 range that we can use to break the game, so to speak? And this is where I think a lot of people might just dismiss how big of an impact this is, because a lot of the debilitating spells in the game don't benefit from this effect. For example, a slow 6, you can't increase its DC. It doesn't even have sustain. Then something like Quandary, it has sustain, but you don't make a saving throw as part of sustaining the spell. Instead, the creature makes a check on their own turn to escape. None of those will be affected against your Arcana DC. Those are still going to be made against your spell save DC. So we have to actually shortlist what spells are we using that do something useful when sustained that demands a saving throw or a spell attack. Now, when analyzing this, you have to come to this from the baseline that spells are already more reliable than non-spell effects. I know there's a portion of people who believe that spell saves are notoriously unreliable and that spells need item bonus to keep up with the math of the game, and they might be celebrating this because now they're effectively getting to, in a roundabout way, add an item bonus to a spell save DC. To those, I recommend checking out this video linked above, where I talk in detail about how no matter what level range you're looking at, no matter what combination of options you use, spells are more reliable than strikes, and spells are more reliable than skills. We just took the most reliable things in this game and made it 30 to 50% better. That is a massive math-breaking jump in reliability. Another way to look at how much of a math-breaking jump this is that Pathfinder is roughly designed that the stats you're good at get a +3 every 2 levels you gain. You can take a look at your spell DC progression from level 1 to 20 and you'll see that. So effectively, when you use reactive spell shift with shift burden, you are gaining 2 levels effectively as far as your offense goes. It is genuinely a math-breaking bonus, and it is going to cause issues in my opinion. The designers didn't just withhold item bonuses, status bonuses, and circumstance bonuses to DCs for fun. They withheld these because DCs are usually a safeguard against really, really powerful effects that are already mathed out to be crazy reliable. And now we just got a way to break that paradigm. At a bare minimum, sustained damage spells like Floating Flame and soon after you pick up this feat, Cinder Swarm, just get a lot better. You will literally get an average increase of 30 to 50% on the damage you do. That is not an exaggeration. You will actually get that much of a damage increase. When you have 4 full active degrees of success, a +1 is a 10% relative damage increase. So this is a 30 to 50% relative damage increase. And I really do mean it. Damage is very much the bare minimum of what we can do with this. Like, you're only doing damage because you have fun doing damage, but you can do many more broken things with it because damage is ultimately not the most broken things you could accomplish with highly reliable spells. The main avenue I see to breaking this effect is area control spells. Area control is a whole category of spells which typically have a templating that's like, you get an effect up front, and then each time you sustain, once per round, you get to repeat that effect or get something similar to that effect. Grasping Earth, where every time you sustain, there's an attempt at grabbing or restraining foes, and if a creature was already grabbed or restrained, they take a bunch of damage. This makes that spell crazy good. Having a +3 to +5 on the DC of this spell, against crowds of enemies, it is going to be a 30 to 50% swing, half of which is a swing on how likely they are to get restrained. And against bosses, you're still likely to grab them. Living Terrain. There is now a substantially higher chance that you will knock enemies prone and or make them clumsy too. Freezing Rain. You have massively increased the chance of enemies getting slowed 1 or slowed 2. Whirlpool. You have massively increased the chance of pulling enemies further into the whirlpool, making it likely that you keep taking damage again and again on them. Stars of Another Sky. You will massively increase the chance that they go 50 or 100 feet up rather than just going 20 feet up, and that hostile actions will not break the fascinated condition, which means they're much likelier than before to both make it all the way to the top of the effect and start taking damage, or just fall down to the bottom. And also, if you don't recognize some of these spells, they were introduced in Impossible Magic, which I did link to at the beginning of this video, so you can go check it out if you'd like. But yeah, like, these are just a few spells I thought of off the top of my head, and there's probably many other broken ones. The harsher the controlling effect on a failure or critical failure, the more broken it is with this math boost. And again, I understand that there's some portion of the Pathfinder community that believes that spell DCs deserve item bonuses. This is not the way to get it. If you believe spell DCs deserve item bonuses, the game as a whole needs a mathematical shift, something that is only going to be accomplished in Pathfinder 3rd edition, most likely. Without that mathematical shift, this is just broken. This just means that people who know that the Spellshifter archetype exists can create spellcasters that are reliably and repeatably and consistently significantly better than their allies are. This is not going to help spellcasters that feel bad at their tables. This is going to introduce a further optimality gap where optimized spellcasters feel brokenly good and unoptimized spellcasters still feel all the bad things about being a spellcaster. If you are one of those players that thinks spellcasters feel bad, I recommend you check out my videos on how to play spellcasters better. But relying on this archetype to make them feel better is not really the solution in my opinion, and I really hope Paizo is going to errata the Spellshifter archetype. This is the one that I'm confident is broken. Now let's look at the next one. Next up, let's talk about the Hedge Mage archetype. The flavor of this archetype is really fun. You are a self-taught, almost rogue mage. You go against the grain when it comes to learning stuff from formal schooling or formal traditions or well-known bloodlines, etc. And this is what the dedication feat gives you. This is meant for intelligence or wisdom-based spellcasters. Charisma casters can, of course, pick it by just having enough wisdom, but then their spell DC will be behind a key attribute intelligence or wisdom-based spellcaster. And the dedication itself just gives you one skill associated with learning your spells, and you get what is a keepsake, which is effectively just your spellbook, but not in a formalized tradition like a wizard or magus' spellbook. It's more of a personal thing, something that you have a connection to, but otherwise it functions pretty similarly. You learn so many cantrips, and you can prepare so many of them per day. As you would expect for a spellcasting dedication that gives you cantrips, there are follow-up basic, expert, and master feats. But they do differ from existing basic, expert, and master feats because normally spellcasting archetypes give you several ranks of spells as part of basic, expert, and master. So basic will give you a scaling version of 1, 2, 3, expert gives you 4, 5, 6, and master gives you 7, 8, 9, not letting you get all the way to the 10th rank slot. This archetype spellcasting feats give you a restricted version of that. You still get the same spell slot progression, but the spells you learn are natively of only first rank when you have basic, second rank when you have expert, and third rank when you have master. You can heighten them among those spell slots freely, but due to your lack of formal training, you don't actually know the natively high rank magic. I think this is incredibly flavorful and thematic, though of course that would make this weaker than other spellcasting archetypes, right? But there are quite a few cool feats that go with this archetype that make it still worth picking in my opinion, mostly because these feats apply to spells that you didn't get from this archetype too. So the first one that stands out to me is Humble Spell. It is a 1-action spell shape, and if you use your next action to cast a non-cantrip spell, note that it does not specify it has to be a Hedge Mage spell. It has to just be any non-cantrip spell. It loses the Manipulate trait and gains the Subtle trait. This is fantastic. In my previous video, when I was talking about the Begone spell, I talked about how good it is for that one silver bullet to not have the Manipulate trait, because now you can use it to get out of reactive strike range, or you can use it to end grabbed or restrained on yourself without getting interrupted. This applies to any spell in the game that costs 2 or fewer actions. If you're in reactive strike range, you can just stand where you are, use Humble Spell, and then cast whatever spell you want. Laughing Fit or Roaring Applause to turn off the reaction, or just some other debuff or damaging spell if you just want to help your party's tempo. If you are grabbed or restrained, you don't need to have Begone on your spell tradition to help yourself. You can just use Humble Spell plus, say, Acid Grip or Gravity Well in case you didn't have Begone on your spell tradition. Humble Spell might legitimately be the single best spell shape feat in this game, were it not for the other spell shape feat introduced by this very archetype, which we will get into at the end of this slide. But before we get there, we need to take a fun detour to the Practical Magic feat. This is a really fun feat. It uses spell catalysts. Spell catalysts are something people don't really talk about. This effectively gives you a bunch of spell catalysts you can craft per day that are no more than half your level. And that's pretty cool. Spell catalysts are useful. They can do some really nifty things. I think maybe in a future video I will go in depth onto why spell catalysts are so good and what are the good ones you should be thinking about. But for now, let's just settle on the fact that this is a good feat because spell catalysts are good. But now we get to the real, potentially broken stuff. Simple Mastery. The first best spell shape in the game, if Humble Spell can be argued to be the second best now. Because this says that if your next action is to cast a non-cantrip spell, it heightens by 1 rank. So long as you can cast spells of that rank. So you can't be a level 11 caster using this to get a rank 7 spell. It will max out at whatever your maximum rank of slots is, but you can use this to take lower rank spells and bring them up to par. You can only use this once per 10 minutes, but you can use this on any spell. Again, it's not restricted to Hedge Mage spells. And in my opinion, that is pretty powerful, if not broken. But it's definitely at least so powerful that this archetype is a very, very strong consideration on every single intelligence and wisdom-based caster. And again, Humble Spell is really powerful to have. Practical Magic is decently powerful. And then Simple Mastery is incredibly powerful, bordering on game breaking. So this archetype comes with a decent dedication feat and at least 2 fantastic feats for you to just get out of the archetype with. So this is a very solid archetype, a contender for every single intelligence or wisdom-based caster. And now let's dig into Simple Mastery a bit. Let's analyze why I think it's so powerful. So I have had a few discussions about Simple Mastery, and there are quite a few folks who believe that I am overrating it, that it's not borderline broken, that it's just a good archetype feat for spellcasters. Simply put, the reason I'm so suspicious of Simple Mastery is all of the combo potential it possesses. It works with all class and item-based spells, so long as they're non-cantrip, and that just opens up the door to an unreasonable number of combos. There are a lot of spells that are really, really good to cast in a certain rank, but get restricted by the preciousness of slots when you're at that rank, or by just the simple gold cost of purchasing those items until you're at a level so much higher that the game can sort of tolerate you buying that item. And this spell shape simply gives you the ability to use a vastly less precious resource on them. And yes, vastly so. The difference between a maximum rank spell slot and a slot 1 rank below your max is pretty substantial. And likewise, the gold cost of a wand that is 1 less than the rank you would otherwise want that spell at is substantial, because gold scaling and the power of spell slots both scale exponentially within this game. Here is a list of a few examples I have come up with. This is not an exhaustive list. In a game with almost 1,000 slotted spells that are non-cantrip, there are any number of insane combinations people can probably come up with, but this is just 5 examples I came up with. First up, a 20th level spellcaster using 8th rank slots for a 9th rank Ferris form. Anyone who's played high level Pathfinder will tell you, Ferris form is one of the strongest spells in the game. It gives you immunity to a whole bunch of scary conditions in high level play, and so many of those conditions are what make high level play threatening at all. So when you're immune to things like death effects, or void effects, or disease effects, or just a whole host of other effects, you are pretty much immune to what makes high-level play scary. And casting it from 8th rank slots is not generally that expensive, and it's worth doing. Heightening it to 9th rank does give you a much higher resistance to physical damage, though. 8th rank Ferris form gives you resistance 10 to all physical damage except adamantine. 9th rank makes that resistance 15, and every point of resistance matters here because while you are in Ferris form, you are immune to healing. You cannot be healed in any way, not vitality effect, not void effects, and not soothe. So simply having a high resistance is useful. Of course, the problem with 9th rank Ferris form is that when you're in the level 17 to 20 range, 9th rank slots are precious, and they remain precious even when you have a 10th rank slot. This is because you only ever get 1 10th rank slot and need to spend a feat to get your second one. So 9th rank slots will remain a staple right up to level 20 after you get them, which means you're likely not spending more than like 1 on a Ferris form. You're likely letting your Ferris forms come from 8th rank slots. And now you can just use 8th rank slots for a 9th rank Ferris form once you're level 17, 18, 19, or 20. And that is just an incredible combo. And this is not the only combo. I know some of you might scoff at this high-level combo being like, well, high-level play is broken. Nobody ever gets there. There are combos at every single level once this feat is available. So here is an 11th level caster's combo, using 5th rank slots for a 6th rank slow. Again, at level 11, your 6th rank slots are precious. The slow you put in that slot has to compete with something like Chain Lightning or Living Thunderbolt. But now your 5th rank slots can be 6th rank slow, and there's not that much competition there. There are still some heavy hitters there, like Corrosive Muck, Wall of Stone, but it's much easier to justify using a rank lower spell slot for slow while still having access to the full brace of 6th rank crazy effects that you could otherwise get. Here's a 9th level combo, using 4th rank slots for a 5th rank Dimensional Drop. Dimensional Drop is another new spell in Impossible Magic that prones enemies on any outcome other than a critical success and inflicts some poke damage. The 5th rank version becomes multi-target, which means now you can use Dimensional Drop without have to worry about choosing it over Wall of Stone or Corrosive Muck or something of the sort. Then there's the possibility of any caster using maximum -1 rank slots for counteracting spells. Counteracting is one of those things where it's really powerful to have, but since it requires a maximum rank slot, it's really hard to justify putting it in your spell slots unless you're dedicating to your role as the party's support. This makes it much easier for a character to be an off support. Simply have 1 or 2 counteracting effects in your maximum -1 rank slots, and when the time comes, they will be maximum rank slots for you anyways. I will also note here, 3 of the effects I listed here are in combat effects. You need to use your spell shape as a 1 action before casting the 2 action spell. Ferrous Form was the only pre-buff I listed here, but another big one to talk about is 6th rank Heroism. Again, this is one of those things which is sort of a symptom of high-level play. Once you have enough gold, you can start stocking wands of 6th rank Heroism, and that lets you effectively pre-buff with a +2 to nearly everything anytime you're expecting a fight in the next 10 minutes. And some people consider that broken, some people don't consider that broken, but all that's besides the point, because being able to use this spell shape, Simple Mastery, means rather than spending 3,000 gold per wand, you will spend 1,400 gold per wand, which means you will have twice as many wands of heroism as you intended to have, and some change to spare. A similar argument can be made about scrolls of 9th rank heroism, where now you will have scrolls of 8th rank heroism that effectively heighten up by 1. And again, scrolls also have exponential gold scaling, so this will be a big deal. Now again, this may not be broken. Maybe after all this is said and done, you're just feeling like you're spending 3 feats and potentially an action in combat and a whole lot of gold to just get incrementally powerful effects. Really powerful, but not broken. Maybe that's still the case, but I still think this spell shape is deserving of scrutiny. And it's especially deserving of scrutiny because of the other spell shape on this very archetype. Humble Spell is already good enough that if Simple Mastery didn't exist, every int caster that's trying to optimize and every wisdom caster that's trying to optimize would still at least consider Hedge Mage. But they might decide, you know what, I like Humble Spell, but I don't want to invest 2 feats and then potentially a 3rd throwaway into getting Humble Spell. I would rather just have options like Time Jump or Begone to save me in those situations, or rely on my team to save me in those situations, and then let me invest those feats in something else, like an Animal Companion, or focus spells from another class, or focus spells from my own class, whatever. But with both Humble Spell and Simple Mastery, I don't really think there is a conversation. When you have something that is an effective silver bullet that removes one of the biggest possible downsides of removing spells whenever it does pop up, and you have a spell shape that can really, really help you grind out great value from lower rank slots with potentially broken combo options, unfortunately that means Hedge Mage has become a near autopick of an archetype, and I don't think that's healthy. When the Psychic dedication got nerfed, I did say that I celebrate the nerf because the dedication was a bit too much of an autopick for, say, wizards especially, but almost any intelligence or charisma-based spellcaster. Now, Hedge Mage is a little better in a thematic sense because it has much less thematic baggage than a Psychic. When something is an autopick but has generic flavoring, it's not that big a deal, but also this is much more of an autopick than Psychic dedication ever was. Like, I would say Hedge Mage dedication plus Humble Spell plus Simple Mastery is disproportionately stronger compared to its opportunity cost to even say just having Psychic dedication. So I think this archetype is deserving of some scrutiny. I think it is a powerful archetype, and much like with Spellshifter, I really do hope Paizo erratas it. That'll be all for today's video, folks. This has been a shorter video. I just wanted to get a video out about these two archetypes quickly because I just wanted to discuss them and hopefully get some eyes on it. I hope that with enough of us being suspicious of these archetypes, we can get some insight from Paizo. Maybe, for example, Spellshift isn't intended to be used in the way we're reading it to be used. Maybe Hedge Mage is intended to only apply to Hedge Mage spells, and maybe these subtleties just didn't make it into the final printing because there have been other typing errors and printing errors in this book. And if that's the case, I hope we get a quick errata on this, because I do think Spellshifter is mathematically broken, and I do think Hedge Mage is at least too much of an autopick, even if you don't consider it a broken option. And I do think both of these might be unhealthy archetypes, which sucks a little, because I love the thematics behind both of them. I love the idea that there's these generically themed archetypes that any spellcaster can dip into. Like I mentioned with Psychic, I don't like it when an archetype that you want to pick has too specific a theme, because that narrows the scope of characters going into it. The most extreme version of being how people joke that every human that was born in Golarion between the years of 2019 and 2023 was suspiciously adopted by gnomes because of the interactions of the fighter class with the gnome Flickmace advanced weapon. And while these two archetypes won't create that, because their flavor is really not that unique or it doesn't create that much of an overhead, they're still problematic archetypes, and I would like to see them changed. That is all for today's video, folks. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I hope you like and comment. Every little bit of engagement helps. If you'd like to see my future videos, make sure to subscribe and click the channel notifications button. I have a video on the Magus coming up soon, and I'll try to get it out as soon as possible, but no promises on exactly when it lands. And I have something where I'll put my money where my mouth is with regards to the Magus, so stay tuned for that. Regardless, I hope to see you next time. Mathfinder out.